that better? Which one suits you?
Lights up there. Yeah.
Don't tell me that the first time you realised that.
It's been 9 years, I had no idea.
Why am I not surprised? Well, look, good afternoon. Look, we're talking today about the current crisis again in the Middle East. The government of New Zealand wants the following. We want diplomacy, as we've just engaged in Europe recently and in Jakarta in the last few days. We want de-escalation. We want a two-state solution with Israel and Palestinians living in peace and security side by side. We want peace and we want balance and calm, and the fact and acknowledge that the problems in the Middle East don't come from one bad actor alone. What we don't want is military conflict and escalation. We don't want New Zealanders in harm's way. We don't want a nuclear Iran. We don't want civilians starving or dying in military conflict. And we don't want Hamas holding hostages and tyrannising Palestinians. And we don't want Israel occupying Palestinian lands. Any questions?
Mr. Peters, were you surprised the situation has reached this point where Israel did attack Iran?
Well, in terms of what they say is a preemptive action, yes, we were surprised, but then not totally in that context.
Can you elaborate? What do you mean, not totally?
Well, there had been talk of that, but not in a way the New Zealand government is remotely involved in or aware of. But our job is to keep our ears open and to be watching circumstances worldwide.
Have you reached out to any of the embassies within New Zealand of either Iran or any of the representations or any of your foreign affairs counterparts in either countries?
Well, we have constant conversations with all sorts of embassies and high commissioners all around the world all the time.
Specifically about the situation as it is now?
About all the situations that are current, yes.
The United States gave a heads up to some of its allies before the attack on Iran began. Did New Zealand receive a heads up from the United States?
Well, we don't make those discussions public. Any information we would have would be dissected and disclosed in the fullness of time. But it's not an occasion at this present time for people to rush to judgment or to rush to final comment without all the research and investigation work being done.
Mr. Peters, do you have an update on how many New Zealanders are in Iran or Israel, and at what point New Zealand might consider a repatriation flight?
Well, we've got 50 registered in Iran and we've got 80 in Israel. We can only say that we have, for considerable time, alerted all New Zealanders to the circumstances there that could be of endangerment to them, and we've done our best to keep them all updated, those who are registered with us.
What would be your message, Mr. Peters, to New Zealanders in Iran and Israel?
Well, it's not the first time we've said, look, this is a very potentially dangerous circumstance, and if you can possibly be removed from this arc of danger, then get out of there.
Have you heard any reports of New Zealanders being harmed within this arc of danger?
No, not exactly at this point in time.
Is there any update on particularly the embassy in Tehran and whether, does New Zealand maintain its staff there, you know?
Look, we have done all we can to ensure their safety and security. But as for the details, we're not prepared to disclose that. For the most obvious reasons.
With the, if the military operation is ultimately successful, deemed to be successful, and Iran's nuclear enrichment capability is stopped, is that on balance a good outcome from New Zealand's point of view?
Sorry, could you say that one more time louder?
Well, if the Israelis are successful in knocking out Iran's enrichment program. Is that on balance a good thing?
Oh, look, the nuclearisation of the world, or the worsening of nuclearisation, is a bad thing. And it's one of the reasons I went years ago to North Korea to try and persuade them against that progress of their nuclearisation, so to speak. It ended up that we saved 125,000 New Zealand birds transiting there every year, but didn't win the arguments, sadly. And the cost of that is a less safe world.
This, Mr. Peters, the UN French-Saudi two-state solution conference that's going to take place this week, you've got NZHERald officials that are attending that. What do you make of the suggestion from the Trump administration that anything that came out of that had a quote anti-Israel stance would potentially have diplomatic consequences for those countries involved? And what is our position going into this conference?
Our position going to this conference will be updated on an hourly basis.
Joe, the conference, we understand, has been postponed.
It's been postponed.
Yeah.
Mr. Peters, following the travel bans imposed last week on the two Israeli ministers, are there any other sanctions or travel bans being considered by the New Zealand government towards Israel at this stage?
Not at this stage, in the detail that you're asking for, no.
Mr. Peters, at what point would we look to evacuate consular staff from either Iran or Israel? What would it take to get to that point?
Well, we're going to do all we can to ensure that these people are safe. I don't know if you saw a famous movie called Argo. Do you remember it? When the New Zealand embassy did enormous credit to the country of origin, that is New Zealanders, in getting the safety of other diplomats in that crisis. The film misdescribed it, sad to say, and perhaps the producers should have called New Zealand before they made that decision to get the history but wrong. But again, we'll do the best we can.
And similar lines of questioning for our Defence Force personnel that are doing peacekeeping missions in and around the Middle East. Are you confident in their safety at this time?
Well, to say that you're confident in the safety in a situation of exploding escalation in a warlike fashion would be absolutely premature. But we hope we've done the best to keep them secure.
How crucial do you think the US is to actually finding some sort of peace in the Middle East? I mean, they have put themselves forward as wanting to sort of negotiate some sort of a deal, and obviously things have only escalated in recent times. So how much weight does the rest of the world need to put on the US being able to achieve that?
That is a very, very complex question. We would hope as much as possible weight can be placed behind their involvement.
Would New Zealand be concerned if the United States entered the war or participated in military action in Iran?
Well, I don't know why that question arises in the first place.
There's been suggestions from the Israeli government that they'd like the United States to be involved.
Well, look, the American president has spent a lot of time saying that he wants peace.
Have you had any discussions or conversations with US officials following their condemnation of the sanctions we applied against Israeli ministers?
We have constant discussions with all of our international contacts from all around the world, and of course the US is no different.
Specifically, what did you discuss, or have you discussed with the US?
Well, again, we can't disclose what we discuss there. These are very, very important talks and conversations, which, as you know, when it comes to diplomacy, requires a thing called confidentiality. Otherwise, it will not happen in the first place.
The Prime Minister is heading to NATO. Have you been involved in preliminary conversations at a ministerial level ahead of NATO in terms of what will be on the agenda and how much this will play a feature in it, or do you think it will be more about what's happening in Ukraine, for example?
I've been involved since I've become the Foreign Minister for the third time, yes, and I've been there myself.
Can you talk to, I guess, how much this will feature on the NATO agenda next week?
Well, I think you'd better ask the Prime Minister that. He's the one that's going this time, not me.
But you're here and he's not.
Well, he's still here in New Zealand, isn't he?
He's not as accessible as you, clearly.
Well, the Prime Minister's going, as have former Prime Ministers, including Helen Clark and Jacinda Ardern.
A Lowy Institute poll has found Christopher Luxon gets the most confidence from Australians in terms of handling foreign affairs matters. How would you assess Mr. Luxon's competency in foreign affairs?
I think his adherence to the advice he's got from Foreign Affairs has been very, very well received, both in this country and worldwide.
Who's he getting that information from, Mr. Peters?
Pardon?
Who's he getting advice from?
You're getting it from yours truly. I know what advice goes up there, and we do our best to listen, not to rush to judgment, to be very, very decisive in our caution, and I think the Prime Minister has followed that line.
And how does he compare to other Prime Ministers you've worked with in that realm?
Well, we're not here for a Prime Minister comparative contest. We're here to talk about the Middle East.
Mr. Peters, what level of help is New Zealand prepared to offer to Israel to defend itself against the attacks from Iran?
Well, we're not going to be engaged this far away in every theatre of war or de-escalation of peace movements or peace initiatives this far away. And this country is probably far more removed in distance from the conflict than any other country on earth.
Are you looking at working together with some of our Western allies to come up with some kind of, I guess, joint statement or message to put to Israel and Iran?
Oh, we always are, on a daily basis, when a crisis happens, on an hourly basis. But again, that's a matter of confidential discussions. No one would confide in us if they thought we couldn't keep our counsel.
What about humanitarian assistance? We've provided that in other situations. For Ukraine, for example, would we look to help Israel or individuals in Iran?
Look, at this point in time, our engagement along those lines has been in Gaza, and it's been significant with independent agencies to ensure that the aid gets to people who are innocent on the ground.
The Israeli government says the reason for launching the strikes was because there had been a shift in Iran's ability to develop a nuclear weapon. They had intelligence that suggested they were able to do it on a much faster kind of time frame than had previously been understood. Is that your understanding as well? Have you seen anything that suggests that statement is true?
Well, I have seen international media comment to that extent, yes.
To the extent that a side effect of these attacks on Iran are to further degrade its ability to have influence throughout the Middle East, do you think that's a good thing?
Well, when we talk about bad actors, the number of proxies that are acting with the assistance from Iran has been an awful consequence in terms of their impact in areas in the Middle East. There's no doubt about that. And that's a consideration that all governments must have when considering the crisis that's happening now.
Would you consider Iran to be one of these bad actors?
Well, as I said, there are no innocent actors at this point in time on this matter.
Including Israel?
Well, the 7th of October terrorism attack has initiated a response, but the question is, how can it be an appropriate response now?
The Israeli government has also basically called for regime change in Iran. Would that be a good thing from New Zealand's perspective if the Iranian government were to be toppled?
Well, one could answer that question, or one could also be very, very cautious, particularly for being the Minister of Foreign Affairs, to say that the democratic or elective affairs or the governorship affairs of other countries belong with their constituents, not New Zealanders.
Mr. Peters, some have described the world as a, quote, dumpster fire at the moment. In your lifetime, if you look at what is happening today, how do you think it plays out compared to other massive events, world events that have played out in your lifetime?
Well, it's probably the worst in my lifetime, but there is just one codicil to that. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a pretty near thing at that time.
But this is current day today is pretty up there in terms of the worst you've seen in the world.
Yes.
Does that keep you up at night?
Well, it keeps a lot of people up at night. We're working longer hours than perhaps we ever have as a ministry, and trying to ensure that New Zealanders, where possible, can be kept safe in circumstances of innocence. And in my lifetime, I've never seen such a uncertain geostrategic circumstance as we've got now.
Are you hopeful that in your lifetime you'll see a two-state solution in the Middle East and you'll see the end to the war in Ukraine?
That's always been our position, across the political divide as well. Successful New Zealand governments have always argued for a two-state solution. And we still will go on arguing that because we believe that is the only long-term solution that'll work.
Is it realistic in the near future?
It would be realistic if there are not international actors doing their best to stop it happening.
The US president has suggested that Vladimir Putin might be able to mediate a deal in the Iran-Israel conflict. The French president says that he's not the right person to do that given his own invasion of Ukraine. Do you think that Vladimir Putin would be the right person to mediate a cease in hostilities?
We hear a lot of comments from all sorts of people all around the world. Sometimes it's wise not to say anything.
But
One more
maybe
question, got to go.
May I ask your reaction to the latest on Trump's travel ban? He is considering adding Tonga, Tuvalu and Vanuatu to the travel ban.
Well, of course, we are concerned about that, and we'll be talking to our colleagues and friends in all of those countries as to what we can do to clarify the circumstance in a way where they are not regarded as being prejudiced in the ability to travel.
Thank you.
Thank you.